What's up everyone, welcome to this video. So today we're going to look at how we can deploy a simple REST API using FASTAPI PostgreSQL on render.com. Now I know that has been a lot, but what we're going to simply do is to basically make our API accessible over the internet using render.com. If you haven't heard of render.com, it's a simple platform as a service tool which allows us to easily deploy our applications. It is similar to Heroku, and I hope you learned from this video. So let me take you through what we're going to deploy. So this is a simple REST API we're going to build, and it's just a bunch of authentication routes, which basically include the login route, which helps us access and refresh tokens, one for refreshing our tokens, signing up, logging out, forget password and reset password, of which I'm not going to build in this video, but I guess I have to make a video to build this so that we follow along. So our code right here simply has a simple database URL, which is Postgres, and we're using async PG, just like you can see right here. I'm using SQL Alchemy, but with the async plugin or with the async extension. So it all starts from runserver.py, where we basically use UVCon to start our server, which is basically running our app that is found in source and then app. So when we navigate to our app here, so we basically have, this is basically one file that is where we create our first API instance, and we basically return a simple message of hello world, but everything is happening inside our source folder right here. So we have an init.py where we basically go ahead and create our app. So I'm using sort of like what is very similar to what the create app function does in Flask, where we create our first API instance, we define the description, the title, the version, and then I have a lifespan attribute right here. So this lifespan is one way in which you can create a startup event using the latest version of FASTAPI. So a lifespan event is one that's going to allow us to basically go ahead and use our database, or be able to connect to our database, or be able to create database tables in our database. And this is where we actually go ahead and define it. So what we do is to first of all import our async context manager, and then when we do that, then we're going to define a simple coroutine, and what this is going to do is to help us to initDB. Now let me take you to where this function is. So this is where we basically go ahead and create our initDB. So it's basically where we import our user model, and then we finally go ahead and create it. If you haven't checked out my video on using SQL Alchemy with async.io, I would highly recommend you go and watch it. And then we also have our session that we yield right here. So this will basically help us to use dependency injection to use our session, and I'll create a video about this later. So we also have our engine, our base class, which is going to help us create our models, which are located here. So we have one simple database model, which is going to be our user model. We have a bunch of configuration. So this is basically our class, which is going to be our settings class, and this is one that's created with pedantic settings. All right, so it's been a lot of talking, and let's go ahead and look at the deploying. So the first thing we shall have to do is to first of all have an account with render.com. Now what I'll do is to go right within our browser, and I'll head over to render.com. So right here on render.com, the first thing we shall have to do is to head over to the dashboard section. Now you'll forgive my mode, I have dark mode right here, but I think I can be able to turn to light mode, just like you see right here. So when I go to dashboard, and this is going to be a simple dashboard. We have a bunch of stuff right here. We have a way to deploy static files or static sites, web services, private services, background workers, Redis. We also provide free PostgreSQL. Now, what shall need in this case is going to be a PostgreSQL database. Now, I'm just going to simply go ahead and create that. So I'll click on new PostgreSQL database, and I'll give this, forgive my suggestions right here, but I'm just simply going to choose a name for this database. So in this case, what I'll do is to call it Bookly, which is going to be the name of our app. And or let me just actually call it Bookly DB, and then I'll give this database name. So I'll say Bookly, and then I'm going to create a user. So I'll say Bookly user, and then I'll go ahead and specify the region where the Postgres instance is going to run. So I'll leave it to the default, and then I'll choose the PostgreSQL version, which is going to be PostgreSQL 15. I'm going to head over to the instance type. So I do not have any metric set up on Datadog, so I'll not provide this. But what I'll do is to go ahead and basically select the instance type, or what we're going to use for our database server. So I'll just come right here and say we're going to use a free one, since we are not willing to pay for a demo tutorial. And I'll just simply go ahead and create this database right here. So once I've been able to do that, I am going to go ahead and basically wait for this to be ready, and we shall get back to this. It's going to be easier to create your database by using a lifespan event. So I'll cover this in detail in an upcoming video about FASTAPI. But what a lifespan event is going to help us do is to basically run a task at the start of our application and also at the end of our application. Now, setting up this lifespan event will run every time the server is to run. So the moment we start our server, it will go ahead and basically create the tables that haven't been created in our database, which is what this initDB function is doing right here. So I'll go back right here, and it seems like our database is ready. So what I have to do is to copy the database URL. So in this case, I'll just go ahead and copy our external database URL. And then I'm going to head over to where I have my env file right here. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and basically replace this specific database right here, or this specific URL right here. So I'm going to replace it with my DB Datadog right here. So since I'm using async PG, what I have to do is to say plus async PG, and what this will do is to go ahead and basically use our async driver for PostgreSQL, since we're using async SQL Alchemy. I'm going to try to run the application in this database, and it will basically also help us to create the database tables inside that database. So I'll come right here, and all I have to do is to run our app. So that's going to be with our simple command, which is actually already running here. So I'll stop our server with Ctrl and C, and then I'll basically run it again with Python run server.py. So it seems like we have a problem right here. So this is Postgres plus async PG. This is supposed to be PostgreSQL. And that will go ahead and create our user table, just like you see right here. So at this point, we've been able to create our database table in our remote database, which is this database right here. And all this is easy because we're using our startup event to go ahead and create our database. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically upload our code to GitHub. So what I'll do is to go ahead and create a simple GitHub repository right in here. But remember, I have a git ignore file, which is going to be helping me to ignore most of the stuff that I do not want to be taken to GitHub. So I'll come right here and create a simple GitHub repo. I'll say git init, and Once I've been able to do that, it's going to create the repository. Then I'll say git add all, and this will go ahead and add everything to our repository or stage it to be committed. So I'll just go ahead and say git commit. So this will be, let's say, first commit or initial commit or whatever you want to call it. So once I've been able to do that, then I'm going to go ahead and create a remote repository where we may want to host this code. So I'll head over to GitHub and I'll say github.com, and right here I'll create a new repository and I'll call this our FASTAPI deploy demo. So this is going to be a simple web service. I'll just say simple web service to demo deployment on render, whatever it is. So this will be render.com. So you may choose to make this public or private, whatever you want to use it, but I'll choose to leave it private. So I'll provide the source code in the description so that you guys can basically check it out. So I'll leave this public and I'll create the repository, and this will go ahead and create the blank repository. Now after creating this blank repository, I'll go ahead and copy the URL to this remote repository, which is going to be our URL right here. So once I have this, sorry for that, so I'll go right in here and I'll set our remote repository or our remote GitHub repository. So in this case, I'll say git remote add origin and I'll paste in our URL. What this will do is to basically tell Git that, you know what, we are going to deploy this on GitHub or push it to GitHub. So once I've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for me to go ahead and basically push our code to GitHub. So I'll say git push -u origin, and in this case we have to push to the main branch. So by default I have the main branch just like you see right here, so I expect that our code is also going to be pushed to the main branch in the remote repository. So this will go ahead and push the code, and that will be set just like you see right here. So if we go right here and refresh, we shall now see that our code has been pushed to GitHub. So once the code has been pushed to GitHub, I'll go ahead and basically create a new web service that's going to be the web service for this specific API. So to do that, you also have to have GitHub basically attached to your render.com website. So make sure that when you're registering, you attach your GitHub or you authorize your GitHub to be accessed by render.com, or you may actually even sign up with your GitHub account. So I'll create a new web service and I'm just going to say build and deploy from a Git repository, which can be a GitHub or GitLab repository. Now what I'll do is to say next, and this will go ahead and connect our repository. So it's going to search through all the repositories that I have on my GitHub account, and then it will finally be able to get all of them, list all of them, and help me to access one specific repository. So this is our FASTAPI deploy demo. I'll connect to it. And in this case, we have our service right here. So I'll basically call it Bookly FASTAPI. And then we shall leave the region to that. I'll leave it to the main branch. So all the changes that will be on the main branch on GitHub are the changes that will reflect in our API in production. So we have the root directory, which is basically default to source, where I can specify the root directory, but I'm not going to specify that for now because the source directory contains code, but all the necessary code to run our app is going to be folded within our root directory. So I'm then going to specify one. So we have our runtime. So the runtime here is going to be Python 3, but you can choose to select any runtime. Since our app is a Python app, I'll leave it to Python 3. And then I'll select the build command, which will run to basically install requirements. In this case, what I'll do is to just leave it to pip install our requirements.txt, which will go ahead and basically be able to install all the requirements that we specify in our requirements.txt. The next thing I'm going to do is to also specify a command that's going to run our app or our server. Now, right now, what we have is our command here, which is going to run our app, which is Python run server.py. And since our run server.py is found within our root directory and it has the command for running our app, we can basically go ahead and provide that. So what I'll do is to go right in here and I'll say Python 3 run server.py, and that will be the one to run our server. So I'm just going to choose the instance type, which is going to be basically which plan that we want to use for our simple server we're going to deploy on. So what I'm going to do is to choose the free plan, since this is a demo tutorial. And once I've been able to do that, I can now go ahead and first of all specify the environment variables that we have for our project. So I head over to the env file right here, and I'll first provide the database URL. So this is going to be our database URL right here, and the value is going to be the database that we created right here. So I'll simply go ahead and copy this, and then I'll have to paste it right here. So this is going to be our environment variable, and then I'll go ahead and create another variable, which is going to be our secret key, which we basically provided right here. So I'll copy this and then paste it right here. So I'll go ahead and provide the secret key right here, but you can choose any secret key. So I'll provide our secret key right here. So once all that is done, the next thing is going to be for me to create the web service. Now go right here and say create web service, and that will simply go ahead and build our web service. So I'm being told that free instance types will spin down with inactivity, so they will shut down if they are not that active. So we need to upgrade to a paid plan. Just if you're building a serious project, you need to use a paid plan. But for this demo tutorial, I just chose to use a simple plan or a simple free plan. And now we see that our build is successful, our API is deploying, and we shall be able to access our API in a minute. So it seems like we have a problem right here, and the problem is we do not have async PG installed in our app. So to do that, what we're going to do is to go right here, and we shall basically make sure you run our pip freeze so that you keep record of the entire requirements that you have in your requirements.txt file. So I'll do is to say pip freeze, and this will be to our requirements.txt file. And once that is done, go ahead and basically git add all, git commit m, and here we shall basically go ahead and say add async pg, and then we shall be able to push. Now I'm doing that because I have async pg in my requirements.txt, which I hadn't included, but make sure you run pip freeze so that you keep track of all the requirements. So if we go back right here we're going to notice that this app will rebuild, and we shall be able to basically redeploy the app. So we see that the deploy has started to add our async PG. So a deploy will occur with the name of the commit with the changes that we specified. So I'll go ahead and keep track of that. Deploy. And now we see that our server is running, but this is not the way to run our server. So this is running it as a local development server. So for us to run our app, what we can do is to go ahead and modify the settings. So I don't know why I ran it with Python run server.py, but what we can do is to use UVCon, which we actually have installed. So I can edit our environment variables, and all I have to come to do right here. So if you're to notice that in our run server.py, we have our app, which we called as create app, which is basically a call to the create app function right here. And what this will do is to return our app. So what we can do is to also go ahead. Let's first run it here so that we demonstrate how that works. So instead of running our app with, let's say, Python run server.py, what we can do is to say UVCon. Since we have UVCon installed, this is going to be UVCon, and then we can say UVCon run server, and then we can get our app, which is this call to our create app function. So we can say UVCon run server app, and then we can say reload, and that will run our app, reloading any changes that we may have. So to start our server and run our app, so that's going to wait for our application startup, and then to basically go ahead and run our server. So what we shall do is to go ahead and use that same command. So I'll head over right here and I'll edit this to UVCon, and this will be our run server and then app. And once that is done, I'll save my changes, and any change to our environment variables is going to redeploy our app. So just like you see right here, our app is going to redeploy, and now we see that our app is running. So let's try to access our app. So if we go to our bookly FASTAPI, hey guys, this is a very unscripted video that I recorded, and honestly speaking, there would be a lot of errors that I would face in the recording of this video. But one thing I want to specify, or one thing I want to emphasize, is that when running FASTAPI with UVCon on render, you have to define your port and host. So you have to specify your host to 0.0.0.0, and then you will have to also specify the port that your app is going to run, which is going to be port 10,000. Now I hope you put that into consideration, and let's go back and see how I set that up. So basically what I had to do was to go ahead to our settings and change our run command. So you notice that it has changed 2 times. So I had to change it from Python run server.py to UVCon run server app, which also ran with localhost 8000. But now I had to go ahead and modify this. After going to this render.com forum, I found that we needed to specify the host to host 0.0.0.0 and port 10,000 for it to run. So when you go ahead and modify your command to this, then your app will start running. So if I go to our URL right here, which I opened up right here, if I refresh, we can now see that this is actually returning not found because there's nothing on our root URL. So I'll go ahead and specify that. So I guess I'll have to reopen the app. So if I go to our URL right here, we shall see that this is not found. But if I go to our docs URL, which I think is where I will place our docs, so let me go back right here where we have our app. So we simply do not have a docs URL, but the default docs URL for FASTAPI is going to be /docs. So when I go to /docs, in this case, you'll see our Swagger UI loaded up right here. And we now see that our endpoints are actually being displayed right here. So let's try to basically test a simple endpoint. So if we go to our register endpoint and we try it out, so we simply do not have anything right now, and we are going to land into errors. But this is a very simple example of how you can have your API running on render.com. I hope you've enjoyed and learned something from this video. And yeah, this is part of a certain series of videos that I want to create at the beginning of 2024. So if you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you guys for your support through this year, and thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.